Hello, good afternoon. Still here. Welcome to the sixth water-centric master planning series talk under TED Talk series. For those of you who are new to this series, just a quick background. This is part of TED Talk series, which is hosted by an initiative at CPR, TEDS, Transboundary Rivers, Ecologies and Development Studies, which was founded when the Ministry of Jal Shakti has established a research chair here at CPR, Center for Policy Research. And since then, we have been organizing TED Talks on various contemporary policy questions. But this particular series is something that we have begun when we started working with the National Mission for Clean Ganga. We had a research program that is looking at various aspects of river rejuvenation. One of them happens to be looking at statutory master planning in cities and how we can make it water-centric, the master planning practices in India. It is under this theme that we're organizing this series, and this is the sixth talk, and we have one of the most familiar faces for those who are in the sector, particularly in urban planning and river rejuvenation. That is Dr. Victor Shinde from National Institute of Urban Affairs. Dr. Shinde heads Water and Environment Vertical and the Climate Center for Cities at National Institute of Urban Affairs. Over the last 18 years, his work has focused on managing urban rivers, integrated urban water management, water security enhancement, climate change adaptation in water sector, and monitoring and evaluation frameworks for water and environmental sector. He has led the development of several tools, guidelines, and advisories for different aspects of urban river management in India. A notable example is the National Framework for Managing Urban Rivers in India, which was launched by the India's Ministry of Jal Shakti and has been adopted by 70 plus urban local bodies across India. He led the development of environment chapter of the Master Plan for Delhi, 2041. He has more than 60 publications, books, journal articles, chapters, book chapters, conference papers, and other knowledge products. Prior to joining NIUA, he worked as a scientist and technical expert in 9 countries in Asia and Africa. And Victor has a PhD in urban water management from Kyoto University, Japan. Before I hand over to Victor to take this talk forward, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please put off your cell phones. And second thing is also that please, for those who are attending online, please leave your questions in the Q&A box there, and then we will pick up those questions when we open up. The plan is to give 40 minutes to Victor for his talk, and then open up for questions from the participants. So with that, Victor, thank you for joining us today and agreeing to give this talk. Over to you.
Great.
You need to put... Where do you use?
Works,
Yeah.
right. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you so much. Right. So thank you very much, Srinivasa, for that introduction and also for the invitation. Srinivasa and I have a very we've been working together for the last couple of years now, right?
More than a couple of years.
More than a couple of years. And we have a common thread that ties us together, which is NMCG, the National Mission for Clean Ganga. Like he is doing a project with them. We have also been working, with the National Mission for Clean Ganga for the last 5 years now. And actually, what I'm presenting today is in context of the work that we have done. So some of this work is already familiar to him because he is part of our advisory board, and a very, a very insightful person to give a lot of comments and a lot of suggestions for us to actually go ahead and improve our agenda for urban river management. So thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, for this talk, what I thought is, while the element of urban planning, in river management is, of course, very important. I actually just wanted to draw a narrative about some of the experiences that we've had, for the last 5 years. We've been working extensively on urban rivers, in different domains, in close to 30 to 40 cities now. And each city has, something unique. Each city has has a different context in which they operate, which also means, the planning context also differs, right? So it is in that context that I just wanted to, share some of my experiences with you, and hoping to trigger some discussion towards the end, all for the betterment of managing rivers, in our country as such. So I just want to give you a little bit of an overview, of how the Urban Rivers Program in India has evolved, right? So it's a relatively new thing. Okay, we've always focused on river management, and I think that is not, that's been there for quite some time. But the urban aspect of rivers, I think that the focus on rivers from an urban context was pretty recent, and I think that is the visionary leadership of the then Director General of Namami Gange and the National Mission for Clean Ganga, Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra. So he had this notion that I think when they're managing the Ganga River, much of the problems that are caused in the river are because of cities. And if cities are part of the problem, they also need to be part of the solution, right? And that is when he approached us, our director, Jagan Shah. And then we began that collaboration in 2019 with the sole purpose of promulgating river-sensitive development in our cities. So to begin with, it was mostly the Ganga River Basin cities that we're looking at. Okay, and just the 97 towns that are on the main stem of the Ganga. And then gradually, of course, we expanded not just to other towns in the basin, but also to other cities across the country as such. So when we started this, I think in December 2019, we got a little bit of a shot in the arm, that encouragement, when the Prime Minister also echoed, a very similar sentiment as to what we were doing for the last 6 months, right? So he mentioned, and this was in the National Ganga Council meeting, that was the first National Ganga Council meeting that was held in Kanpur, 2019. There's a need for new thinking for river cities in India. The river health needs to be mainstreamed into the urban planning process. I'm sure it must have gone in his speaking notes, but I think the fact that he actually pointed it out, was a little bit of an encouragement for us, so that, have the endorsement right from the highest office, in the country. Yes. So one of the first things that we did, as part of this partnership, was to launch a national framework, which is called the URMP framework. It's called the Urban River Management Plan framework, which essentially is a template for cities to follow. Although you can't templatize it, but it's a generic template that cities can actually customize, to prepare their individual river management plans. And at the heart of this framework are these 10 boxes that you see on the screen, looking at not just the environmental aspect, but also looking at economics, looking at the social aspects as well, right? So with this approach, what we wanted to promote is a slightly more holistic way of looking at rivers in India. Right? Okay, that is not only concentrating, not only focusing on pollution. Pollution is important, and I'm not undermining the context of that, but also going beyond pollution, to look at that systems approach to how rivers should be managed. So that was the first, big thing that came out of this. Very soon, what we also realized is a lot of the work that we want to do in river management, cannot be addressed unless the planning angle is sorted, the planning story is sorted out, right? So that is where we came up with this national guidelines again, for making river-sensitive master plans. And my talk today is going to be a little bit based on, on these guidelines that we came up with. So the whole idea here was, while this is not a mandatory document, but I think planners across India can refer to this in terms of how they actually go about making their master plans a little bit more river sensitive. Again, because of Mr. Mishra and Mr. Mishra. There was another Mr. Mishra who was the secretary of Mahua at that time, Durga Shankar Mishra. So they took this very seriously, and they organized one meeting with all the chief town planners of India, of 27 states and the Union Territories. And this was then introduced to them. And the last count we have is somewhere around 55 cities have actually adopted this, to start at least making those delta incremental changes, in their master plans as such. Now, while all this was happening, what we realized is that we have introduced something new to the Indian cities. Okay, and for them to embrace it in its entirety, it would be very useful if these cities are provided a platform where they can actually interact with each other. Because it's a new thing, right? How long can we keep doing capacity building, right? There has to be some mechanism where cities are able to talk to each other, exchange best practices, exchange knowledge, and then kind of have a peer-to-peer learning process to progress the agenda for urban river management. And that is why in November 2021, we launched the River Cities Alliance. Again, this is first of its kind. We launched it with only 30 cities to begin with. The Minister for Jal Shakti did the honors. And over a period of time, now this has evolved to 145 cities across India. The primary purpose of the River Cities Alliance, like I said, is to provide that platform for city officials, and it's essentially the municipal commissioners, to get together and exchange knowledge on how to improve the state of urban rivers using those two major flagship documents that we prepare, right? The Urban River Management Plan and the River Sensitive Master Plans as such. I think for us as NIUA, it was very important why that, why the framework was in place. It needed to be demonstrated, for it to have that buy-in, from the different cities, right? Because now once you know that this has been implemented, then the city officials are a little bit more inclined towards taking this up. So we prepared the first set of the urban river management plans, and Kanpur was the first city in India to have done that. Then Aurangabad, now of course it's called Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar, and Ayodhya. So these are the three cities that actually, we help these cities to prepare their urban river management plans. And now some of these plans are being implemented in various capacities. Okay, so this was perhaps the first meeting of the River Cities Alliance. And Srinivas sir also was there as one of the keynote speakers in the sessions. The whole idea, like I said, to have a congregation of these commissioners from the different cities and come up with a declaration. So this is the Pune Declaration that you see there. So there are certain set of actions that all the cities committed to doing. Okay, and these are not binding, so these are not legally binding as such, but things that cities would be able to do voluntarily, right? And I'm very happy to report that not all, but at least a majority of the cities have taken some or the other action, based on the Pune Declaration. We will have the next meeting in Surat. This is going to be three months from now. I think it's in April and is when we have planned it. Okay, so again, looking forward to how that unfolds. Now, one of the major events or one of the major aspects of scaling up, the work, this was in September of 2023, last year, when actually the NMCG approved the preparation of 60 urban river management plans. Okay, because now they wanted to scale it up. They saw value. Cities began to see value, in developing their plans, and it was creating that, the need for that holistic thinking for rivers. So this is with the support from World Bank, that currently is being implemented. So 60 cities are now in the process of preparing the urban river management plans as such. And in December 2020, and this was at COP28 in Dubai. That is when we signed an MOU, with the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, which is a little bit of a counterpart kind of a body in the US. So you can see Ashok sir, I think he's with you now. But yeah, he was then the Director General of NMCG, and there are three mayors of three different cities. It was a MOU signed for knowledge exchange, for again, sharing best practices, and some kind of even physical exchanges in terms of tours and academic study tours as such. Yeah. Okay, so now, why did we even think of this in the first place? So now my team did an analysis. In fact, we started to look for how many river cities in India are there, right? And we found that there is no data on that. Okay, somehow we sifted through all the records. So this was actually a primary survey, so my team actually, we went on Google Earth, to find out, how many, looking at pretty much class 1 towns only, because class 2, class 3 would be a little too much. And seeing if a river is passing within a kilometer, of that city, we consider that as a river city, right? So 58% of our class 1 town cities, right, maybe 2-3% here and there, that is fine. But the idea is to show that a majority of our class 1 cities actually have a river either flowing through them or flowing besides them, right? And the map that you see on the right is actually the density of river cities state-wise. So the darker the shade, the more river cities that particular state has, and vice versa, right? So you can see, like towards the east, Odisha, for instance, or the northeast, almost every class 1 town, has a river. So this just actually shows the need, for this kind of work, the urban river management plan. It is not just restricted to a select number of cities, but the work that has happened is actually applicable to a majority of the cities that in India as such. Now, having said that, the trend is this, and I'm sure all of you know that, so typically as urbanization happens, this is what we find. And the last circle that you see is perhaps not the case in many cities, but some cities are now getting to that. Kanpur, for instance, it's a very similar trend that you find there, where the development is right up to the edges. So the whole idea of this program, promoting river sensitive development, is to avoid the state where the city and river are not able to exist in harmony. So that's the trend that we wanted to change, through this whole project. Okay, let's get this side. This is about the River Cities Alliance. But as I'm trying to build a case, for the planning element, for master plans being very, as effective avenues, for a lot of the river management problems that we have, there are some learnings that we've had over the past 5 years, and I think these learnings also accentuate the need for urban planning, to integrate urban planning, within the river management landscape. One of the things that we learned is that, managing urban rivers requires solving wicked problems. Okay, and these problems are not easy to solve, sometimes even seem impossible, right? Okay, I'll just show you a case here. These are pictures where you have slum settlements along the river banks. This is not from one of our cities, but this is a city in India. A lot of the cities have this issue, right? Now, the typical response that the administration has is to evict these people from this. But that does not really solve the problem, does it? It actually just shifts the problem somewhere else, right? And that is a wicked problem. So understanding, solving this problem will also require solving a lot of supplementary problems, step B, step C, step C. It's not just solving this little thing. Okay, and I think the more we worked in cities, we realized that while there are some low-hanging fruits, okay, but a lot of the problems are actually of this nature, where you require, some nuanced treatment of the problem. Okay, and it's not just an ad hoc way in which these can be approached as such. That's one. Another thing that we also have learned, over these 5 years, that managing urban rivers is not really a standalone exercise, right? And this is from practical experience. I'll just show you an example here. This is the URMP for Kanpur. It's just in a nutshell. I've summarized everything here. So the URMP for Kanpur has around 19 interventions that they have identified over the next 5 years. Well, at that time, over the next 5 years, they were going to implement this. Something around 30% is already complete, right? So you can see, number one is, like, for example, strengthening river-related planning regulations in the master plan. Number 3 is strengthening the FSSM in the city, so on and so forth, right? So a set of 19 interventions that the city identified, okay, under the environment, economic, and social themes, so that they would have to do it. And as we began to work with the city, what we realized, there are certain things, like say number 3 or number 5, so these come directly under the purview of the municipal corporation. Solid waste management, for instance, is a direct relation of the municipal corporation. But then there are a lot of actions, that are there, that are to be taken at a state level, at a parastatal level, right? So for instance, the first one, it's the development authority, which is your state subject. So they will need to kind of, enter into the into the picture and start doing their thing, right? So if you look at number two, there's the irrigation flood control department, in terms of real-time monitoring of water quality and such. There's the forest department, horticulture department. And finally, the last portion which you see, it also requires not just government agencies, but it also requires now other stakeholders, NGOs, the bridging partners, right? People who are, who are there to stand between the government and the communities, right? Because very often governments don't directly interact with communities, and for good reasons. They have several things on their plate, right? But these bridging partners, they actually play a very, very important role, right? So from this canvas, if you see, right, it's just evident, it can't be the responsibility of one organization. It has to be a multi-stakeholder, a coordinated effort, between different agencies in order to get this, we need to have an effective plan up and running. Number three, again, what we also realize is that managing urban rivers is an incremental process. It's there are certain quick solutions, that can happen, right? But very often, so some solutions are just not possible to be done, in one go. Again, let me show you an example here. So this is an example of Kanpur. Now, one of the objectives of the Urban River Management Plan, that is objective number 4, is to have a riparian buffer along the river banks, right? Now, riparian buffer is, and I'm sure you would know that, these are very effective entities as such, from a dual purpose. They also protect the river from detrimental activities of the city and vice versa. So there are fluvial floods, they also help protect the city from these fluvial flooding events, right? Now, when we started to implement this project in Kanpur, we did a little bit of a mapping to see where is it that we can provide these riparian buffers, okay? And the circles that you see, you can see that there is development right up to the edge. Now, there's just no way that can be done, right? So, and getting rid of that encroachment is easier said than done, right? So then there's a political process to be followed. I mean, it's not that straightforward, right? So one of the decisions that we took, at that point is, let's protect what we can today. Put where the riparian buffers, okay? And when that area comes up for redevelopment, so that has to be now integrated into the master plan. That anchor has to be given, so that space required, the 30-meter stretch that you require for the riparian buffer, should be anchored into the master plan, right? So that is how this, and it'll happen over a period of time. Again, that redevelopment might happen after 5 years. It could be up to 10 years. You never know, all right? But the point is, I think we have to keep at it, right? And use the master plan as a leverage to to get these things done as such. Okay, number 4. Again, a very important learning. What we something that we found out was that I think managing urban rivers is more about optimal solutions and not perfect solutions, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because there is always some amount of trade-off, that exists. I'll give you an example here. Okay, these are some pictures, but when we were preparing the master plan for Delhi, so there was a delegation, from maybe Delhi, so there's an organization, and they came to us, putting forward the case of urban agriculture in Delhi, right? So their focus was, they are farmers in the floodplains. They need to be protected. Their livelihoods need to be protected, right? So the master plan for Delhi must account for that. And they were right, and there's nothing wrong in that. A couple of months ago, later, there was another delegation that came to us, the environmentalists. And they were of the opinion that, no, you have to keep the entire floodplain free from any kind of construction, not even temporary construction, right? It has to be a natural kind of a thing. Right? So there was a group of those environmentalists, right? And there was another group, I think it was the University of Virginia, and they had done something, and they came up with a very wonderful plan of how to improve the real estate value, the economic value of the rivers. So they came up with a plan. Okay, this is where you can have the real estate. This is how commerce can come in, and the Yamuna can actually help enhance, the economic value of the surroundings, right? And another group of Urja is a resident welfare association. Around 1,000 RWAs is what they look at. They wanted recreational opportunities, right? The Yamuna floodplain must have a lot of these recreational opportunities, right? Now, in some sense, you see, none of them are wrong. Everybody's right in their own way. But there is that competition for the floodplain, right? So which is why it is never going to be a solution where everybody is going to be satisfied. It will always have to be an optimal solution where there's a little bit of a trade-off. Somebody has to yield, right? And coming up with an amalgamated model that perhaps works, maybe not the best, but that is the model that will work, right? And a lot of this river management is pretty much that, right? We're looking at optimal solutions, right? In some way, I'm becoming more and more convinced that these perfect solutions, especially in light of the kind of development that we're having in our cities, right? So these are becoming increasingly difficult to kind of attain as well. Okay, and the fifth one, and again, this is very recent thinking, we are also beginning to now realize that managing urban rivers requires transitioning from an interdisciplinary to a transdisciplinary thinking. Now, for a very long time, we used to always focus on multidisciplinary things, right? Okay, when you're doing something, you need to have knowledge. If I'm managing a river, I should have knowledge about hydrology. I should have knowledge about, but that's it, in silos. Then we move to a phase where it's interdisciplinary, where you're actually using that knowledge, right? So in any work that we do, I'm using the knowledge of hydrology, I'm using the knowledge of hydrodynamics, so on and so forth, or social sciences. Based on the URMP framework and all the work that we've done, we just think that now is the time to actually use all of this to create a different entity itself. Right? And that, in my view, is transdisciplinary research, where you're applying different aspects, looking at society, looking at the worldviews, and looking at different elements and creating, or at least attempting to look at blue sky ideas. Because a lot of the work that we require, it just requires reimagination to a great extent. So sometime actually, Srinivas sir and I were also talking, master plans haven't really worked. I mean, in some ways, we have master plan, it's a statutory document and such, but there's not a single master plan that has actually done what it was supposed to do, right? So maybe there's a need to reimagine the master plans. And that is why we need to require this transdisciplinary thinking, in terms of how do we actually go about that reimagination. And I think maybe this will happen, I guess, but over time. But that is the need, that is what we're thinking, that this is where we should be going with. So all said and done, so I just put those 5 problems, the learnings that we have. One is, of course, solving wicked problems. The other is urban river management is synergistic. It's not standalone. It has synergies with the with other aspects that are happening in the city. It's an incremental, optimal solutions, right? And right in the middle of it, if you see, it's urban planning that can actually hold everything together. Okay, because urban planning has the power, to anchor or to, I would say, it is like the cohesive force, and that can actually help solve a lot of these issues that you see on the screen here. So it is with that mindset, we have approached the urban planning element for river management, trying to understand, where are those entry points? Where should master plans actually look to integrate river sensitive thinking? So we did a very an interesting analysis. I'm sorry, maybe the text is too small for you to see, but we reviewed a number of master plans from the perspective of understanding how exactly these, and these are master plans of cities that actually have a river, some major river, right? Just to understand how these cities have actually looked at the river in their planning process, right? And there was certain criteria that we used in evaluation, and the 3 that you see at the bottom in a slightly different color, these are the ones, where especially the last 2, maybe not the 3, but the last 2 are the ones where there are some very good practices followed as part of the master plan. So this was also for us to understand what are other countries doing, what are other cities doing when it comes to the planning element, right? So now, generally speaking, if you see, one of the major problems in most of our master plans that we found was the river zones delineation. There's hardly any master plan that actually talks about that, whereas that is perhaps the most important. That is the fundamental step to actually protecting a river, or to actually go about doing anything about it. Unless you have the demarcation, okay, nothing's going to really work. Interestingly, most of the master plans actually have covered the land use, use zone, use premise angle pretty okay. And again, if you see these boxes, there is something in dark and something in light. Dark is when there's a little bit more detail provided in master plans. In light is, okay, something mentioned in passing, or perhaps just a recommendation or so, right? Now, this actually gave us a lot of insights into what our guidelines should focus on, because now we knew where the gaps are, right? We knew, okay, these are the, and of course, it's a small sample to look at, but it took a while to actually read all these master plans as well. But broadly, we kind of got an idea. Okay, so where are the challenges? What our cities are actually facing when preparing these master plans. And on the other hand, we also had some good practices. Some good master plans. That have looked at rivers. In a very progressive manner as such. So it is on that basis, we came up with this making river sensitive master plan. So all that learning, and of course, we had a lot of discussions with experts. We have number of workshops that we organize with planners, just to get a sense of whether we are on the right track, and who's get their inputs as well. So again, this was launched by the Honorable Minister at that time, Mr. Gajendra Singh Shekhawat. Now, of course, we have Mr. C.R. Patil in June 2021 as such, right? So just to summarize, okay, now, okay, fine. Why exactly the master plan? Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this QRDP guidelines. This is something that is taught in courses as well, right? So you have the perspective plan, the regional plan, the development plan, so on and so forth. We decided to zone in on the development plan, or the master plan as it is called in several cities, for a number of reasons. One, is that it is a legally binding statutory document owned by the city, right? So anything that goes into into the master plan or a development plan, has that legal backing. So you can be taken to court if things are not proceeding as per the plan, right? So which is why, based on our experiences with the Delhi Development Authority, when we were preparing the master plan for Delhi, every line, was viewed so carefully. We're debating it, like mulling over it. It's been an issue. At that time, the planning commissioner was Linu Sehgal. So she used to always tell me, Victor, they'll take us to court. They'll take us to court for this. That is the, and I mean, see, honestly, can't blame them, because a lot of the time they spent actually is in court as well, right? So it's illegal. So I think once the aspects related to river conservations are put into the master plan, now you have a very good kind of a base, to kind of build on, right? It also, it also is a long-term horizon. If you remember, I was saying that river management is an incremental process. Sometimes it'll take us 15 years, 20 years. So you also need something to anchor it, right? And I think the best place here is a master plan where you can anchor that transformative incremental process. It is also the capacity to have citizens involved, citizens, again, while we said it is a multi-stakeholder effort, far too often we underestimate the role of citizens, of general citizens, in managing a common pool resource. So I think, again, you must be familiar with the 1968, I think 1960 or 65, somewhere around that time, and Gareth Haddon came up with that theory of the tragedy of commons. Okay, so there the idea was not common people, but common resources, right? So when it's left up to people to exploit it, I mean, not left to use it, they will end up exploiting it. And that is precisely what is happening with rivers, right? So it's important to involve citizens, because perhaps once they're aware of what the problem is, once they're aware of what their stake is, in that whole ecosystem, it makes it a lot easier, for them. I'll share one example a little later in terms of how Aurangabad is actually doing a terrific job in terms of involving citizens, in the management of their river, the Kham River as such, right? It's also, the master plan has that authority, to ask the different agencies to coordinate amongst themselves, right? Okay, again, so these are some of the very interesting features of very powerful features of master plans, which just makes it very attractive for us to anchor or seed the idea of long-term sustainable river management, into that particular document as such. Now, so I'm not going to go through the entire document, but what essentially this entire document talks about, are 7 planning tools that planners can use, in order to reinforce and strengthen the river consideration. It may be there in some cases, but also to strengthen it a little bit more, right? The first is localizing national policies and initiatives. Now, again, this is something that we've learned from experience, right? Today, if you talk about wastewater reuse, there is no planning authority who's going to refuse that, because this is coming right from the top. It's a national policy. Under Amrut, we have that right. But now, moment you talk about maybe nature-based solutions or something water-sensitive urban design, maybe the buy-in is not that much, right? Nature-based solutions, फिर भी ठीक है. I think there's a lot of traction on that account. But slightly, or the water energy food nexus, nobody's going to talk. I mean, nobody's going to entertain that too much, right? So I think it's important to kind of, leverage that national policy. And I think the master plan, so we've shown examples of how actually that can be done, to make it a little bit more strong. So today, the national agenda for urban rivers is very strong. Okay, so there's a lot of traction, like I just showed you. We have a national framework for it. There is a program in the pipeline right now. It's called the Healthy Rivers Program, which is for 6 basins across India. And urban river management, it's a $1 billion, it's funded by the World Bank. And urban river management is actually a central tenet of that whole program. There are multiple things, of course, but it's a very central element of that whole Healthy Rivers Program, right? So I think now that it is there at a national level, I think master plans should just embrace it, embrace it, because it is coming from the top. Nobody's going to question it. There may be still questions, but it's the resistance would be pretty less as such, right? The number two is, once you have that, once you're embracing the national level actions, there are town-specific sectoral strategies that master plans can actually introduce, right? It could be a strategy, a blue-green strategy, for instance, developing a blue-green infrastructure. And there are several master plans that have actually done that. So then we have these traditional aspects, land use assignment, because essentially all said and done in India, we are still looking at master plans as land use documents. Although the reviews that we've done of master plans outside of India, Melbourne, for instance, Copenhagen, so they don't look at it only as land use. I think there's a very nice evolution in terms of how now it's becoming strategic plans. So you're looking at climate change, they're looking at the net zero, and not necessarily only restricting themselves to just zoning of the land as such, right? I think we will eventually get there in India as well, right? Then the development control regulations, again, the bread and butter of any master plan, norms and standards, okay, which essentially is, there are certain standards and norms. For instance, what should be the width of buffers alongside drains? The master plan is a very ideal avenue to actually insert that. You'll be surprised, we don't have standards in India as such. Bangalore master plan has, something that they've introduced, but no national standards as such, right? So I think this is a unique opportunity, for master plans to actually look at, what kind of standards that they should be introducing. Number 6 is recommendations and directions. Now, there are certain things that are difficult for the master plan to mandate. Okay, now here it has to be a little bit of a recommendation, right? Now, for instance, it's easy to mandate, let's say 60 or 70% of reuse of treated wastewater. If the calculations are okay, the math is okay, which is what we did in the master plan for Delhi, right? But it is perhaps difficult to mandate creating maybe citizen avenues for, or the engagement of citizens in decision making. Right now, it's difficult to mandate that. We can encourage that, because the moment you start to mandate, then you have to also create those substructures as such, right? So I think every master plan, and if you read them carefully, there's always something that they recommend, right? It's ideal to do, and I think the more progressive organizations will latch onto that. Will use that as a leverage to then devise a strategy to kind of take it forward. And finally, the master plan also is a great avenue to introduce special projects. Right? So the master plan of Puducherry, for instance, that has actually introduced a not good project, but it is a desalination plant. Okay, and there are pros and cons to it. We will not get into that, but the point is, they were actually able to mention that, in the master plan itself, that okay, going forward, we will now have a desalination plant, to address the water woes that we have. The master plan for Goa, for instance, that has actually looked at a flood management, stormwater management system. Okay, so they've prescribed that as part of it. I'll show you how Delhi has also done, some work in that regard. So essentially, the guidelines talk about these 7 things and providing examples from not just India, but across the world in terms of how cities have gone about and done these things. So because what we realize is theory is one thing, okay, but actually when planners or not just planners, like everybody, when they see that, okay, such a thing has been implemented somewhere else, it gives them a little bit more confidence, right? Okay, kahin to hua hai. So if it's happened there, okay, okay, we might as well take a chance with it, Just on a slightly tangential note, now with last, I think November, maybe we had this huge air pollution crisis in in Delhi. Well, not just this month, we have that every year actually. But this time we decided to do something about it. Better late than never, as they say. And I got my team to do a little bit of a survey of the office building, and to see how do we actually at least reduce the AQI to a manageable extent, and see what are the options that we can kind of do, right? So they came up with a solution, so there are two options, one is you put air purifiers in every room. And if you do that, we would need around 170 to 80 air purifiers. And these filters need to be changed every 6 months. So it is a cumbersome thing. So I said, okay, let's look at something else. The other option which they found out was, why don't we tap the polluted air at the source? So nowadays all our buildings, this is, okay, maybe you can open the windows here, but it's all the what comes through a air handling unit. So you have the fresh air that comes out into an air handling unit, and from the air handling unit, it goes into the ducts, and from the ducts or HVAC, ventilating, air conditioning, and from there the air comes into the rooms, right? So if you tap the polluted air at the source, okay, so install a HEPA filter. HEPA filter is a slightly stronger filter, and then at the air handling unit, we install an electronic filter. Okay, so this was the research that we did. We came up with a model, okay, which would work best, for our the 2 floors of NIUA. Okay, and then we went to our administration, to show them. The cost was something around 36 lakhs, which is substantial, for any organization. And there's a little bit of reluctance, right? Okay, theek hai, dekhte hain, and then there's a good plan and stuff like that. But then what we also realized after a couple of days, there were 2 organizations in the same building who had done exactly that. The International Labour Organization, just 1 floor above us, and then there's another organization called RIS. They've done exactly the same thing. So we went there, we took pictures. Okay, we came back to the admin, we showed them, yaar, unhone bhi kiya hai. It just 1 hour to approve it. Okay, theek hai, okay, it's been done. It's been done. Theek hai, kahin pe agar hua hai, that's the best. So same thing here. I think planners also, when they see that, okay, this thing has been implemented somewhere, there's a little bit more, I don't know, willingness, to embrace that particular concept. And I think that is the reason this whole guidelines is full of examples of how, how these things have been done. Okay, now just this last few slides, just to show, how some cities have actually used these guidelines, in their master plans, right? Now, this is the example from Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar. We prepared the master plan for this city, so which is why, we were also working very closely with the development authority, right? In Maharashtra, so there is that regulation of a red line and a blue line. I think maybe no, this is a master plan, yeah. So this has actually gone into the master plan now. So the red line and the blue line. So the red line is a 1 in 100, blue line is a 1 in 50. So if you remember the first point that I had mentioned, looking at local policies or embracing that local or national level guidelines. So this is how we approach it. देखो Maharashtra ने ऐसा बोला है. So there is no reason for you not to put it in the master plan, right? So now that became very attractive for them, and now they have put it. So that delineation of the red line and the blue line, okay, was done. The 2 circles that you see on the side, is in the previous master plan, the proposed land use along the Kham River. I'm sorry, it's a little bit small here, but it was actually yellow, which is all residential. So now in the new master plan, they have made that change, to actually introduce that line, and then to have that delineation, that buffer that we kind of require, right? So it's a small change, but the direction provided at the state level actually helped them and gave them that confidence to include it in their master plans itself. Okay, here is another example from the same city, in terms of the DCRs. Again, looking at examples of how other cities have done, so between there is 2 zones. One is the restrictive zone and the prohibited zone. So from the river edge to the blue line, is the prohibited zone, and between the 2 colored lines is the restrictive zone. Now, this was fairly easy, because like I said, once the once the direction comes from the top, then it's now just a matter of, putting things together and getting things at all, right? So I think that is something that some Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar was able to do very effectively. The URMP for Bareilly. Okay, so again here, one of the elements of any URMP is how do you actually influence the master plan, right? So any URMP that we prepare, there is always a section, where there are certain directions of how a master plan should be looking at. Since we were working, in the city, we also made that effort to meet the development authority and provide them with the recommendations of what the URMP is, right? So now here, again, Bareilly master plan has adopted these. So there's demarcation of floodplains. They were very uncertain whether they should use a 1 in 25, a 1 in 50, or a 1 in 100. Ideally, for big rivers, we normally use 1 in 100, but they've kept that open. So, okay, whatever, as per a scientific study, whatever works, but that demarcation must be done, right? One of the major problems in Bareilly was that all the water bodies are being encroached. Well, not all, but many of these water bodies are being encroached, right? And they don't have any buffer around the water bodies. So this is an interesting thing that they have introduced in the master plan. Any water body 30 hectares or above, it would have a buffer of 30 meters. Anything less than that, less than 10 hectares, would have a buffer of around 90. Actually, it's less than 10. It's between 10 and it's not less. Okay, I can't remember the exact number, but it is the smaller water bodies we decided to ignore in this because that would be too complicated. I think it's 1 acre to 10 hectares as such. There you have a buffer of 9 meters as such, right? Again, this was never there in their plan, right? And I think while it is perhaps not a very watershed moment, but it is still that a small dental change that they've made and going on. And I think that these small changes will actually create the impact that we would want. This is the master plan of Ayodhya 2045, again, which is informed by the URMP of Ayodhya. Like I said, the good thing in Ayodhya when we were working is that the vice chairman of the Development Authority and the municipal commissioner of Ayodhya Municipal Corporation were the same people. So UP actually has that in many UP cities. Even Kanpur, it is the same. Varanasi is the same. You have the same people heading the two organizations, right? So if they're convinced, then you can kind of kill two birds with one stone, right? I mean, that's a wrong way of saying it, but yeah, you can kind of get two things done with one go as such. So that is how, I think the Vishal Singh, he was the commissioner at that time. He was really convinced, okay, this is a good approach. And because of him, I think we were able to get a few things, into the master plan. I'm not going to go through all of that, but that is where it is. Okay. And finally, of course, our Karma Bhumi in some way. So that is Delhi. So since we were already working on the Delhi master plan, I'm not going to spend too much time here because I think we will have Srinivas is planning a separate session on that. But the idea here is because there was, when we prepared these guidelines, there was always question asked of us of NIUA, yeah, guidelines apne bana diye, but where are you implementing it? And we just saw a very worthy candidate in Delhi because we were also preparing the master plan for Delhi, right? So it just made very logical sense to look at what those guidelines are, discuss it with the Delhi Development Authority, and these have gone into the draft master plan. Everything that you see on your screen here, this is actually there in the draft master plan using the guidelines that we did. Now, in the final, I'm not too sure how much will remain, but at least we've done our job, and this is now sitting with the ministry, for notification or whatever the next process is, right? So there is a 300-meter green buffer along the river edge. Interestingly, what we did is also we divided the ozone into O1 and O2. I think you're all familiar with that, so on and so forth, right? One unique thing that the Delhi Master Plan introduces, is something called as a green-blue factor, right? Now, this is interesting because, this is now putting the onus on developers, to create properties or to develop properties that are eco-friendly in nature, right? So for instance, if it's an impervious thing, it's a factor of 0. And the more ambitious the initiatives are, the greater factor you get. So for any property to be approved, any new property to be approved, that is, so that you will always need to have a minimum green-blue factor. It's only when you maintain that factor that you would be approved. Okay, but that is the stick approach, right? But we've also introduced a carrot approach. Now, if you achieve that kind of a blue-green factor that is required, then there are certain leverage or certain incentives in terms of FAR leverages, in terms of property tax reduction, etc., that are also put in the master plan. So this we were a little inspired by the London master plan. London master plan has something similar, so we've customized it to to the Delhi context as well. Yeah. Okay, so I think with that, I just wanted to, like I said, this is more of a sharing session, for us to share the experiences that we've had, and one of the things that, like I said, one of the things that we have, we can kind of confidently say that urban planning really has a vital role. When it comes to managing urban rivers, without the interventions on the urban planning side, it's going to be a lot more harder, to achieve the desire, to achieve the outcomes and achieve the outputs that we want, for our rivers. And I think, it's just now for the urban planning paradigms and the tools to evolve, so as to bring, so as to integrate river thinking in a lot more sophisticated and a lot more integrated manner, right? And I think that is when whatever we have imagined, will ultimately bear fruit as such. So thank you so much, for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the story of urban rivers in India, and very happy Srinivas sir के साथ हम काम करते ही हैं. But if any of you are also interested, please, we have a 5-year program with NMCG now starting December. So the next 5 years we're going to continue on this program. Any of you are interested in supporting us, helping us, contributing in any way, we'd be very happy to have that, right? Thank you, and thank you again, Srinivas sir, for inviting me, and it was a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Victor, particularly for those very nice things that you've been saying about me in between. But also, in fact, the time was over, those 40 minutes, about 10 minutes back. But the talk was so interesting, I thought that I should not interrupt it. And then we wanted more as you were going in, particularly those empirical examples that you're giving. And there's so many things, even though I think the last time we met as part of that advisory board was about 6 months back. I think, I don't know when. But quickly, before I open up for the participants to put in questions, at one level, you are embarking on this big program of 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Urban river management plans. I mean, you could call it somewhat special. In fact, I must say for the information of the audience that you see, NIUA happens to be particularly the water and environment vertical happens to be one of those very few hubs that have been consistently producing a body of work on water sensitive urban planning. And that's partly the reason why, of course, we had a certain amount of convergence, and then he had an opportunity to say all those great things about me. But we are trying to explore a small part of it, is to basically something that he alluded to in his conversation about, is it really possible to reimagine the statutory master planning process in cities to accommodate some of these concerns around water? So it basically emerges, my question emerges from that, is that how do you plan to, the urban river management plans that you're going to do for 60 cities are independent of master planning process. I mean, they are, unfortunately, because you do it now, but then the cities for which you are doing the urban river management plans maybe at different stages of preparing the master plans. I think it is more of expecting you to share your thoughts about it, because I know it's very difficult to respond to questions saying that, okay, how can you really expect the CURMPs to have an impact on the master plan? But how do you see that that you could pursue? I mean, one is, of course, the fact that you prepare a master plan and then put it out there in the domain for the information of both policymakers as well as for the public, so that there is a certain amount of debate that happens around the master plan preparation when it happens, whenever it happens. And that way it is informed. But from an institution, particularly those who have been doing this fascinating initiatives like River City Alliance, how do you see advocating or pursuing the city governments or the state governments for that matter? In fact, we would pitch more at the state governments. We had a lot of exchanges on it. How do you see, and what is the NIUS plans? That is one.
Sure.
And the second question that I have is the very simple question. You mentioned about this 30 meters, 9 meters for different sizes of water bodies. How did you arrive at them? One. Second is that there have been plenty of these decisions by the NGT and courts about certain buffers that need to be put in.
Absolutely.
Did you reconcile, and how did you reconcile?
Absolutely, absolutely.
If you could respond to that, I think we can pull in some of those questions. Would you
Sure.
like to pull in
Yeah,
more?
sure.
More?
We
Yes.
can do that, yeah.
Me? Would you like? Yeah.
Thank you, Victor. You mentioned the couple of international best case practices. I think Ulaanbaatar and New Orleans. So you go and find interesting stuff from Mongolia and Louisiana. But I was very, and presumably the Tula River and the Mississippi. But I was very intrigued not to find, because you're looking at best case practices, I was intrigued, more than intrigued, really quite astonished not to find the conspicuous absence of the Curitiba, which is the stuff of urban river governance legend, right? Are you aware of that?
No, not really.
Okay, because Curitiba in the 1970s, I had the occasion to work on this for a paper of mine when I was looking at transboundary governance, river governance. So the Curitiba is the southern Brazilian city which has
Curitiba.
No, the pronunciation is Curitiba.
Curitiba,
So
okay.
the spelling is Curitiba. So the pronunciation is Curitiba.
Okay.
So the Curitiba has 5 rivers flowing through it. And I thought more than Louisiana, an interesting parallel would be a city from the global south, which has similar issues like the Brazilian city of Curitiba, which has 5 rivers. So what they do in the 1970s is to deal with flooding, urban flooding in its cities, because 5 rivers flow through the city. What they do is to buy up private land along the flood plains and convert it into parks. And they do this with minimal resources and very little time, but they turn it around and said it becomes a stuff of urban river governance lore. It's really cited as one of the most astonishing and very durable cases. And then the reason I suggest that, and it may be a good idea for you to look at it, because you mentioned the master plan, and here is where the master plan is used to also bring in peripheral floodplains to create regional parks, so that what the river course is then integrated across through a chain of regional parks, and which is, again, as I said, maintained at low cost. So that's I would urge you to look at the Brazilian experience, which is far more insightful for us. The second is, I was wondering, again, this is very, very, I'm sure there's no urban river governance person who hasn't worked with this very interesting frame that Jamie Lerner gives us, called the idea of urban acupuncture. Have you engaged with that?
No.
So the idea again here is to, very similar to the human body and the human patient or ailment, is to poke an area, an ailing area that your presentation is shot through with what afflicts our cities, to poke an area in such a way that it heals, improves, and creates positive outcomes. So Jamie Lerner actually goes on to create this very powerful concept, which is, there's very rich literature in river governance on the idea of urban acupuncture. So I was hoping to, ask you a follow-up question on that, but I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Can we take one more question?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Any other questions around the room? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Nishant and I'm.
No, he's got this.
Hi, my name is Nishant and I'm an urban designer. Thank you for the excellent presentation. We've been very keenly following its development in the last few years. At any stage, do you feel that since a lot of work was done earlier in policy, which goes beyond river, it almost overlaps on climate change and very pertinent issues, recurring issues. Do you think now this policy is also situated at the right position to address some of that? Because we are finding a lot of these other issues related to water, moisture, pollution and, atmospheric rivers, we all so suddenly happening.
Yeah.
I mean, this to me seems the right platform to really start broadening. Once you have allocated your current strategies to the master plan teams, you are sort of more open to coalesce more further complicated set of climate changes.
Correct.
And my second part was that, is there any team in your like nodal agency which is looking at technologies of simulation and stronger sort of data management? Because GIS is one, it's usually land-based. There is other methods of simulation, which the others, there are now technologies available, and I feel your team is the most sort of, can take it up further at the national level. So your thoughts on that?
Great. Thank you, Nishant, for that. So maybe I'll respond now. First of all, thank you for these questions. I think these are very, very insightful questions. Some of these I did not know, but I'll go and look those up. But I think your question is very relevant, because this is something that has been plaguing us as well. While we prepare these urban river management plans, and a very strong component of the urban river management plan is the link to the master plan, right? These master plans have their own time periods, so how do we actually go about influencing that as such? Now, for us, we were a little fortunate that when we worked in these 4 cities, so all these 4 cities were in the process of preparing the master plan. So it is a little easier for us to kind of facilitate all of that, right? Now, one of the suggestions that the current Director General has, is to include these state level, is to actually institute a URMP steering committee at a state level. So because there'll now be these 60 URMPs that are being prepared, and we institute a steering committee, and that steering committee must have representation from the development authority as well, right? At a state level, right? Including universities, right? So I think that is something that we've already set it up for Uttar Pradesh. In fact, for all the states that we're working with. So maybe that could be one. I'm not too sure how it will still play out. Okay, but at least at a state level, that is the effort that we are taking. That these people are at least apprised of, what is it that we're doing, and if they're convinced, and I hope they will. Okay, so then they take it on. So it's not only those cities for which URMPs are being prepared, because that's the advantage, right? Because if they roll out something, it'll be for all the cities in the state. So that is something that we're hoping to look at it. Sir, regarding your questions about the buffers, you're right. And NGT also has, in fact, all of these things we looked at. So we looked at 3 things. One, we looked at any existing master plan that has suggested these buffers. So that becomes a little bit of a precedent. So we have some justification in terms of that. We looked at international examples. Okay, although that is not a direct fit, but just to get some sense, because there were no studies that we actually did. In fact, a lot of the studies research studies that we came up with, they actually advocate a dedicated research, to identify what those buffers should be, right? So in other words, if a city has to decide on what buffers it is, they should commission a study, get a university, get some researchers to work on it, and then have very city-specific buffers as such, right? But then we thought that might be a little, we wanted some generalization as such. And then third is, of course, we looked at NGT, so wherever I think they've given these orders in UP, even in Bangalore, so these are 2 direct cases that we found. And it's based on that, we provided these in the guidelines. Now, the guidelines are not mandatory. This is something suggestive. Because for instance, a lot of the times planners, like I said, they need some evidence कि यार ये कहीं हुआ है. So then that makes them a little bit more confident, to embrace those guidelines. So that is how it has been put. Our narrative to all the planners that we talked to for these URMP cities was also that Bangalore has done that. If you want, we can also adopt that here, in Bareilly as such, so that is the kind of thing that we looked at. And ma'am, these two things that you pointed out, I think this is good learning for me now. I'll go back and look these up.
We didn't know the pronunciation that it was Curitiba, but
Starting
it
with
was
that.
actually Curitiba was a huge thing at that
Yes.
time when the planning circles, particularly School of Planning everywhere, we talk about that, but not for river governance. It's actually more for the BRTS. BRTS or mass transport system, mass rapid transport system.
Yes, that's what it's known
Right.
for, but very interesting takeaways also for us.
For the river
Yeah.
governance,
Yeah,
right?
That's a good one, yeah.
it made
Yeah,
its
but-
name in
yeah.
the mass transport. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
sure,
good.
sure. I think that's it. And these are good suggestions because, like I said, it's an evolving paradigm in India as well. I think the more knowledge we get from people like you, we'll always be happy to see how we can then look at it. I think Nitesh, right? Sorry, Nishant. I'm sorry. I think you made a very, very interesting comment in terms of now that the framework is ready. Can we look to introduce more ambition to it? More added elements. Honestly, we haven't thought about it right now, but it's a great suggestion. I think this is a very opportune time, since cities are embracing it anyway. They've got attuned to it, so we may think of adding, more elements, to the framework. We are already in the process of thinking of a URMP 2.0, because when we prepared this in 2019, and based on our experience, we realized that certain things need to change. We need to kind of advance on a certain motions. So maybe that could be one thing that we may. It's a great suggestion. I think just looking at added elements. We've also received some feedback from especially international organizations saying that your framework does not really look at climate change. Okay, urban, but inherently it is. Actually, when you're protecting rivers, these are great adaptation measures. A riparian buffer, like I said, introducing a riparian buffer on the banks of the river is an adaptation measure. So that is another thing that maybe we realize that we have to now make it a little bit more explicit. Put those terms, those buzzwords or whatever you want to call them, okay, to make it a little bit more attractive, to give that international appeal as such. So the URMP 2.0 is now, we'll be looking at all those things, and perhaps we can also look at your suggestions, from that angle. And your second thing was on the data management simulations and such. While NIU team does not really get into that, so we do not do, we rely a little bit more on technical organizations for that. But data management is something that we certainly look at very, very strongly. Now, if you go to the River Cities Alliance website, indiarca.org, you'll see a RCA data wall, which actually captures all the information for these 145 cities. To begin with, we are looking at some initial parameters, some basic parameters. Okay, but going forward, we'll again scale up the ambition and try to see, looking at more sophisticated and advanced parameters, and then also do some kind of an analysis. So RCA data wall is what it is on this.
Is it the learning portal that you're, Mr. Ashok Kumar here,
Oh,
your
Ashok sir is
former
there.
DG
Okay.
and our colleague now at CPR. So he's, I hope, because it is not full name, it is Mr. Ashok Kumar. Please, because since he's suggesting, because he was perhaps part of it in developing it, please tell about our learning portal, your learning portal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
so-
that is definitely Ashok sir.
That's Ashok sir coming up.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Ashok sir. And in fact, this was something that we introduced during his time.
Yes.
So the idea was that, when we came up with these two major documents, like I said, it was a new thing in India, right? So we had to do a lot of capacity building, and we organized quite a few for cities. But then at some point we realized, yeah, बहुत ज़्यादा हो रहा है, to what level can we do this? And every now and then we have to keep doing these capacity building programs. So that's when the idea came, that why don't we develop a module, on these two topics, urban river management plan and the making river sensitive master plans, right? And then host them, on a permanent platform where people then, who's interested, and we can also but encourage city officials to actually go through that module. And these modules are essentially video lectures. So each of these modules, there are around 15 to 20 minutes videos, taking them through the entire process of what a URMP is and how a URMP should be prepared. That's one. Number two, what a river sensitive master plan entails and how should you go about doing all of that, right?
You should also mention about the book that you produced.
Oh yeah, we also wrote a book, which is managing urban.
It's not a book, it's a tome. This one.
Yeah. So I mean, see, like I said, all these are all experiences that we gathered and then we put them into some place. So that learning platform that Ashok sir said. So now that is available on the National Urban Learning Platform. So NULP, so which can be accessed by all the 4,900 ULBs in India. Anybody who has an interest can actually log in. So I think the latest numbers, this is thoda old hai, I think some 6 months ago. So we had somewhere around 120 people, officials who had registered for these courses. It's not a very big number, I know, compared to the number of ULBs we have, but I think it's an incremental thing. We'll have to just keep at it, and then hopefully, at some point we'll have those numbers that we want, right? So yeah, so that is about the learning platform, sir.
Nishant, I think the part that you mentioned about the data and simulation model, spatial modeling, I think you were talking about, if I'm correct. I've been advocating for it, that they should do it, NIA should do it under the platform of RCA, River Cities Alliance. And it needs to respond to the specific demands of the ULBs. And and I think this is a conversation that we had when Mr. Ashok Kumar was there as the DG, and then talking about what is the future of the River City Alliance platform that they have been able to build. I see a great deal of promise as well as potential for that platform to support the local governments in practicing best practices like that. So I hope that NIA could.
So
I'm
we'll
trying
work
to
on
put
that
you on
together.
spot to basically work on that
We'll work
idea.
on that together.
But but I just now that we finished one round from the room, just let me just go to the questions on Zoom. One from Mr. Paritosh Tyagi. Could you please kindly elaborate transdisciplinary thinking? In particular, are fishermen and pilgrims included in transdisciplinary thinking? And he
Nice.
extended another question saying that in master plans being developed at present for cities located on the banks of major rivers, is there any thinking about decommissioning dams
That I think you're better suited to answer.
and removing obstructions to natural flow of the river? So
maybe I'll answer the first question and I'll leave the second one to you because you're more of an expert in that.
I don't want to impose my views on it, but certainly I'll try to respond.
Yeah. So the first, I think that's a wonderful point of view, whether fishermen and the farming communities or fisher folk farming communities are included in the transdisciplinary thinking. So I think there is no reason why they should not, right? So the way we are imagining transdisciplinary thinking is, using these different disciplines to produce something new. Like I'm not, well, maybe I'm a little bit biased here, but I think the URMP framework was what emerged out of that transdisciplinary thinking, right? It did not exist, right? It is something new that came up, because we looked at all these, we had an understanding. You see, for instance, while preparing the master plan for Delhi, I actually visited these floodplains and I visited the farmers. It was part of the exercise, and I think, and also the slum settlements that had encroached, right? And one of the things that emerged very clearly was that those people are not there out of their own choice. So they've come there, because in search of employment opportunities, in search of economic growth and such, and there is no other place where they can settle. That is the only place that they can be, right? So that, until then, I'm an engineer by training, so I think a little bit more from that perspective. I think those experiences actually, shaped something, right? I mean, it helped me understand what the ground realities are. It also helped me have an empathic view towards these encroachers. We typically look at encroachers as a problem, right? Whereas it should not, right? I think there's a more subtle understanding to how these should be there. So which is why in the master plan for Delhi, we actually have provision for urban farming, right? So initially that was not there. I think DDA was not very keen, but I think we pushed our way through and it is very much there, right? So the point I'm trying to drive is, I think with transdisciplinary thinking, the best thing that emerges out of it is something very new. You actually challenge the business as usual. And I think that is what we need to do, right? Like Srinivas sir and a little while was saying that, master plans need to be reimagined. That's challenging the business as usual, right? Okay, and I think it is in that context that I actually wanted to introduce transdisciplinary thinking, that, we'll need to look at that entire picture, the bird's eye view, okay, and come up with something, that we think, would would be dynamic, would be able to address, what the current and anticipated needs are, and also help us to stay ahead of the curve. So we're not always perpetually caught up in a catch-up game, right? What it is in water supply, like peri-urban areas expanding. So the water utilities are always catching up. The demand is always greater than what the supply is, right? But that's a different line. But it is in this context that I was actually referring it to.
So, well, quickly on the,
Yeah,
right.
examples,
Oh,
yeah.
well, you see, I think it's quite sensitive one, decommissioning dams, and there's also very popular one, I guess.
Yeah.
But let me just give you a scenario here. Delhi's 90% of water supply comes from upstream dams. And 2023 floods, if you get a chance to look up the different pictures that were produced by NRSA, and in terms of the way flood has happened, which one do you prefer? Do you prioritize decommissioning? Is it the unregulated growth along the banks or the dams upstream? The reason why partially the 2023 Delhi floods have happened was because of the challenged capacity of the upstream Hatnikund barrage, because it was in a precarious situation. In the absence of the Hatnikund barrage capacity to moderate the flood, given the conditions in the downstream in terms of the unregulated built-up growth along the banks of the river, think about what would have been the impact.
Sure.
And how cost efficient is to decommission a dam or regulate the growth. I'll just leave it to you. It's quite popular as well as, romantic idea as actually to think about decommissioning dams. I understand where this is coming from, but you need to look at the ground situation and as well as the context of India or Indian cities before we pursue this.
Absolutely.
Right. Then another question from Zoom is that could you share your thoughts about the governance of feeder nalas or natural water channels? What is it, and what could be the way to improve this? That
Governance
is
of
from
what?
Arkaza Singh, who is a former colleague. Governance of feeder nalas. Feeder.
Feeder nalas. Oh, the drains, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And our natural water channels.
Yeah.
So the feeder nalas, the one which
feeder,
yeah,
the feeder
that
rivers.
collect sewage
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
drain into the rivers.
So again, a very important point, right? Because nowadays, when it comes to urban river management, there's a tendency for people or a lot of the governments to go for that interceptor sewage, kind of a system, where the drain is flowing in a polluted state for a very long time. It's just at the outfall that they divert it to a sewage treatment plant, and where it is treated. Now the river is protected in some sense. Okay, so the river doesn't get impacted, but for the entire stretch, the drain flows in a polluted state, and it does not provide the benefits that it should provide, to a city as such, right? So this is a notion that we have very strongly addressed in the URP component, that when we are looking at rejuvenating the river, it is not necessarily only the river that you look at. You're also looking at water bodies. You're looking at drains. For that matter, you're also looking at the groundwater, because groundwater ultimately will provide the base flow that the rivers require in the lean season. Right? So the notion of the URP is that drains are also equally good assets or equally compatible assets as the rivers, and their maintenance and ensuring that they stay in a non-polluted state, will provide multiple benefits. So which is why if you look at the examples that I provided today, right? So there are these buffers for drains, they're not for rivers, okay, either for water bodies. So these are the elements that we have introduced in the master plans, because I think that is a very, very important, it's not an end like interceptor sewage. See, don't get me wrong. I know I don't have anything against them. I think that sometimes it's really important. especially when you have to beat off the heat from NGT. But all said and done, they're end of pipe solutions, right? This is just something that you're preventing or just, preventing the river from being polluted. But if you look at that holistic and transformational solution, I think we need to look at drains from the point where it is flowing and ensure that it stays in a non-polluted state as such. So that's my take on it. Yeah.
Before we take more questions from Zoom, I see one there. Any other? Sarang? So, respectfully, could you please keep it short? Thank you for joining on a regular basis.
Pardon me, slightly different with you.
Sure.
You talk about the evolution of the urban towns and program, right? It's evolution, there's nothing to be evolution. We are all civilization grew by the river all over the world because water was a necessity. Today, आज भी water की necessity है, लेकिन हम river के पास खड़े नहीं हो सकते. Where is the necessity? So what I mean to say is that हम लोग program पर program बनाए चले जाते हैं, experts आते हैं, educated people say okay, no, nothing wrong with program. फिर program का result क्या होता है? For instance, program बनाओ, पहले से भी बदतर हो रहा है. पानी है जो है, river का पानी लो या underground water from Punjab. Water was people, now you can't drink underground water. So you can't drink water whether underground, whether by the tap or by the river. So where is the civilization? पानी की civilization वो कहाँ मर गई? ठीक है. और दूसरा जो टॉप एक साइड है, दूसरी साइड इसकी ये है, जितना भी वेस्ट है, जितना भी सीवेज है, जितना भी इंडस्ट्रियल टॉक्सिक्स है, और जो आपने नाले की बात की, जब बहुत नाले हैं दिल्ली में, सब जमुना के बीच में घुस रहे हैं, हर शहर में घुस रहे हैं, हर जगह तो मवेशी मर रहे हैं तो उसके बीच में डाल रहे हैं, पर पता नहीं क्या क्या होता है. सो आई वोंट गो इन डिटेल्स. कहने का मतलब ये है, इन प्रोग्राम का रिजल्ट क्या निकल रहा है, पहले से भी बदतर होता जा रहा है. इस पर ध्यान देना चाहिए कि इतनी एफर्ट करने के बाद इतना पैसा लगाना, मामी गंगे, दिस गंगे, दैट गंगे, जमुना, पुराना, ढिमकाना, वो तो पहले से भी गंदी होती जा रही है. हम कहाँ जा रहे हैं? हवा का देखिए, घर में प्यूरिफायर के बगैर नहीं जा सकते, पानी फिल्टर किए बिना तुम पी नहीं सकते. अच्छा, मैं दिल्ली में 50s में आया था, 40s में, 47 के बाद हम लोग पंजाब से इधर आए. यहाँ इतना ब्यूटीफुल था माहौल, साफ हवा, कहीं भी सो जाओ, सूरज निकलता देखते, सूरज डूबता था देखते थे, और कहीं भी घूमते थे. आज नाक बंद करके चलना पड़ रहा है मुझे दिल्ली में, दम घुटता है ट्रैफिक में घुस के. Where are we heading to? What about this program? Thank you.
I think no, this is a good comment, and I think I completely understand the frustration, genuine frustration, and I think at some level all of us maybe to some extent also identify with you. मेरा सिर्फ इतना कहना है कि ये जो हम programs बना रहे हैं, they will take time to deliver the results that are intended for it. अभी आपको जान के बहुत खुशी होगी कि जो गंगा नदी है, इसमें जो इन्वेस्टमेंट्स गया है, right? So Ganga Nadi is now considered amongst the cleanest rivers in the world. There is data to actually prove that. Okay, मैं tributaries की बात नहीं कर रहा, यमुना है, हिंडन है, उनकी बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ. And it is also one, नमामि गंगे को ये recognition UN ने दिया है. Okay, so that is I think 1 or 2 years ago when Ashok sir was around. तो एक okay, I forgot what that award is, but UN ने उनको award दिया है कि this is one of the better restoration programs globally. ऐसे 7 उन्होंने दिए थे.
One of the heritage.
Something, I mean, I just kind of, if it was in Canada, I remember he had gone to Canada to receive that award. So my opinion here is that while it is, the cynicism is understandable, I think we just need to keep at it, right? And with the hope that, those incremental changes, like I said, you will need incremental changes over a sustained period of time. Namami Gange ka aaj jo sthiti hai, that did not happen overnight, right? They had to make those investments over a period of time. And that is why they are where they are. So with air pollution, again, that's a completely different ball game. But people like us, I think we just need to keep at it, through the research that we do, through the study that we do, and hope that, this resonates with some decision maker. I'll give you an example with our program, so, and I think
Many questions. So.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just do very quick, because I really want to acknowledge the people who were actually instrumental in furthering our program, right? So when we had Rajiv Ranjan Mishra ji, so again, a visionary, like I said, he understood the concept of what we are trying to propose. Then came Ashok sir. Okay, again, he took that again, he brought in new elements to, that whole program as such. And the current Director General, Rajiv Mittal sir, he also has a slightly nuanced approach to doing it. So we've been very fortunate कि ये जो key decision makers हैं, so they've been able to understand what it is. And it is because of their input as such that, this program has been, has progressed so far. It's the same thing, like I think we just need to keep at it and hope that, we get those right decision makers to identify and resonate, with what we are maybe looking at. Sorry, it was a little too long. but yeah.
Just quickly to SUH, perhaps it might help. If these programs were not there, things would have been much worse, perhaps. So that's one way of
That is
looking at
one way
it.
of looking at it.
Right, quickly. Sure, sir. Okay. But here is a young man who is trying to ask question in queue.
No, mine is a very small query. You have talked about the, river sensitive urban development plan.
Ji.
But whatever examples we have quoted in your talk are mostly from the plain areas. So have you any sense of urban planning in the hill areas which are close to the rivers?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any such examples or do you have any
How
plan
many
to
URMPs are?
undertake such study?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I know that there's a lot of devastation of the towns in hills also due to floods and so many due to flash floods and regular floods and other things. So that also needs a kind of study or look
Yes,
or rather understanding of, because they are different ecology, different
Absolutely.
territory,
absolutely.
different, geography.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you have any such thinking on that about the hills also, kindly highlight, otherwise forget it.
I'm actually glad you said that, because this is something that has also emerged in our discussions, because not just hill cities, we're also looking at coastal cities, for example. Again, a very different kind of ecosystem or arid cities, right? So I think in the URMP 2.0, which I just mentioned a little while ago. Okay, so these are the geoclimatic regions that we are trying to look at. Some of the URMPs, like Srinivas sir mentions, it's also in hilly areas. And the conditions are completely different, right? You can't use a 1 in 50 year return period there. The whole city will be submerged under that. So you need a little bit different understanding to how that approaches, right? So thank you so much for that, sir. I think I'll assure you that, this is work in progress. The second version is now going to look at these different geoclimatic zones and provide context specific recommendations and directions as such. Yeah.
Just a quick question on that. Is it how many of the 60 URMPs cover hilly areas in India?
This is out of the 60, I would say maybe around 7 to 8, 7 to 10, not many.
So
Uttarakhand,
there's-
the ones in Uttarakhand are,
You can
Mostly,
keep
yeah.
looking out for, because there is a
Yeah.
URMP that's going to be.
Yeah, I am from Uttarakhand.
are also from Uttarakhand. Okay.
Which are the towns you have covered in Uttarakhand?
So we're
Even
looking,
this-
sorry?
No.
Yeah, so we're looking at Srinagar, we're looking at Tehri, we're looking at Uttari, there's Rishikesh and Dehradun. So five of these cities in the first round, and then there will be 7 more in the second round that we take. Those names have not yet been decided. Yeah.
And second small question about the whole thing. You see, the problem is that now most of the rivers are dying out.
Yeah.
So there are no rivers now. So in fact, your entire focus on this river sensitive urban planning may fall flat another 25 years of time because there are no rivers now. All rivers are drying up.
They're not, sir, but
Huh?
fine.
So what is going to happen? In fact, recently I went to Madurai. That famous Vagai river is no more there, it's a Nala. So it's the case with most of the rivers in small towns
That's it.
and this thing. Of course, big rivers like Ganges, Brahmaputra and all that.
He will address it, but
Yeah.
let's take the questions who are
Yeah,
waiting.
this is
Yeah,
another
Sarah,
thing.
yes.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful talk. My question to you is, increasingly in India, we see that the master plans are engaging with rivers in terms of like land use assignment. Particularly in terms of greenfield areas that we have DCR supporting these land use assignments. But when it comes to if we are trying to have a more nature-based approach to rivers within the cities, so where the existing brownfield fabric is there, or if we want to deal Because if we want to have a nature-based approach, then it comes out encroachment and that kind of issues, litigations and follow-up. Or the other fallout is regarding the flooding issues. So how can we deal with it? Is the master plan the right instrument to it, or should we also look into in terms of how we can do it through at a level of the state bylaws or DCRs, or in terms of whether we should look it towards as a policy perspective?
I think great question. And I think that's always, again, the perpetual problem that we have, greenfield versus brownfield. A lot of things are possible in greenfield. Okay, even in Delhi, the master plan, the area that came up under land pooling, a lot of interesting things that we introduced, right? So brownfield, the biggest challenge is, getting any encroachment. I mean, if you want, like you say, you want to introduce nature-based solutions, they require space. Any nature-based solution will require space, right? So that means now you have to get rid of something. You have to create that space. That is always the most challenging part, because now we are entering into a very different territory. Okay, it is no longer a planning territory. Okay, so now we are entering into political territory. It is a difficult thing, right? So I think two things. One is, we may want to look at NBS or such solutions that are possible at that scale, right? Things like rain gardens, for instance. Rain gardens don't require too much space, right? These are small things that can perhaps not handle the entire problem. I mean, problem in its entirety, but at least can assuage, can mitigate it to some extent, right? So looking at context-specific solutions that will work in brownfield, and perhaps maybe leave the other solutions for when that area comes up for redevelopment. So redevelopment is actually a very powerful strategy that any master plan has, right? And I think if it's used intelligently and with the right intent, of course, then it creates a base, for a more progressive planning, in future as such, right? Especially when it comes to the brownfield development. Yeah.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. So Delhi's ozone also has this phasing out.
Absolutely,
clause.
absolutely.
So could you please
That is exactly why it happened. So we have the ozone, and then as per the irrigation and flood control department, we were asked to demarcate a 1 in 25. We did that on our maps, and then what we found out is, like if you look at 1 in 25, there's a lot of it that is already encroached. So now this idea actually came from Linu ma'am. She was the commissioner planning at that time. She said, why don't we divide them into O1 and O2? Okay, so then O1 is an area that you can still protect. These are the slightly more pristine areas. And O2 is something that, we have a certain different kind of norms for that. But with the condition that when that area comes up for redevelopment, it will then inherit the characteristics of what the O1 zone is, right? So from that, see, you have to play around. I mean, the idea is you have to also reinvent. I can't remember now, maybe Srinivas sir may be aware of if such a thing has happened where they have divided zones into, or it was just Linu ma'am's creativity. I'm not too sure, but this is how we have to deal with brownfield. Like just coming out with out of box solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. In fact, one of the previous speakers, Shirley Balani, discussed about using instruments like TDRs to deal with some of these O1 characteristic, O2 characteristic kind of development, if you want to deal with it. But let's get back to finishing these questions on Zoom. One question from Mr. Upendra Rawal. In fact, there are two questions. One is, I don't know what is sterility, but I think it is a typo, I think. Soil holds the secret of climate, whatever, sterility, salinity, what? Urban growth is providing waterproofing surface of land. How do you keep the soul of soil alive? That is for you to think about for a moment. He has got similar kind of question. I think Upendra Rawal's question is,
so how do you?
this is about correcting that. Yeah, I think one, you can think about. The other question is a colleague here, it's the CPR Champakas. Thank you for sharing insights on the ongoing nationwide efforts on river-centric master planning. Here is a question. Is there a contradiction in mobilizing master planning as a planning instrument for protection of rivers in sensitive ways? Master planning and zoning involves drawing clear lines and zones, even for natural features in urban geographies, which defy predetermined boundaries. Essentially, the instruments that you have, the tools that you have is as part of master plan. They work with more definitive zoning kind of approaches. Whereas the natural features are not necessarily.
absolutely.
They defy it. So that is an associated question is how do we enforce buffer zone? Bengaluru's stories is not that encouraging.
Yeah, that's
So just your thoughts, I guess. That's
sure.
it.
So maybe I'll take the first question first, and I'm guessing the question was more about soil infiltration,
The first one. So
I think it was
perhaps
about that.
no, it's
with,
climate and salinity. I thought
with more urbanization, how do we get water to infiltrate?
urban
Is that
growth
what-
is providing waterproofing. With,
the growth is not
Yeah.
allowing the water to go inside, right? Impervious, right? I think it's perhaps that. So that is standard. I think that is happening across cities that we have.
there are these new technologies
Yeah,
that
yeah.
actually are
Absolutely.
providing pervious but yet stable surfaces in the
Absolutely.
ground.
And,
yeah.
and the NBA solutions that you pointed out, a lot of that can actually help in improving the permeability, improving the infiltration. So there is also a very encouraging trend now, okay, especially when it comes to riverfront development. You see, in India, we okay, without naming anything, we tend to follow a very maybe a particular model of riverfront development, which is relies a little bit more on concrete as such, right? But now there are cases. Ayodhya is a great example where they are now introducing, elements of nature-based solutions within those concretized things, right? So they're actually digging up, breaking off the concrete. This is the ghat actually,
Mhm.
so which is also kind of a riverfront if you look at it that way. And then now they're introducing. So this actually came up from the URMP that we suggested to Vishal sir, who was the development authority. And so there are ways, so I think, of course, what impact it'll have would be fairly less, but at least the thinking is in the right direction, and that is a little bit more encouraging as such. Master plans, I think this question was also very relevant that, master plans are able to only control the area under the development authority, right? And rivers typically are beyond that, right? And I think I think that is where, a master plan must be able to talk to the regional plan or the perspective plan. So I
If
think
it
there
is
has to
there.
be high, yeah,
If it is
if
there.
it is there.
Yes.
But that hierarchy has to be there. I think even our URMPs, right? We realize that a lot of the actions at the URMP needs to be taken at the state level, right? So that vertical synergy, the vertical level of governance, that also needs to be strengthened. And I would imagine it's the same thing when it comes to planning, to address that.
Right. Her question is also about your thoughts about enforceability of these buffer
Buffers,
zones
yeah,
that
yeah,
we
yeah.
have.
See, enforcing, well, I
Did,
really
did
look
you have a chance to relook at even though it is not notified yet,
Yeah.
the Delhi master plan buffer zoning, has it been effective? Did you get a chance to
It
look
is-
at it in the recent times?
So it is, well, it's there in the draft master plan, but
Yeah.
I think he perhaps means more from the practical implementation perspective. It's perhaps easy to put it in the plan, but how do you actually go about implementing it? See, there are challenges, I think, and I think to some level, monitoring is really going to be critical, but also perhaps some innovative ways of creating those buffers, right? So if you have, for instance, a vegetated strip, serving as the buffer, instead of maybe barbed wire or something, so that might actually encourage, the protection of those buffers and, prevent the encroachment, that is there. I think cities will just have to experiment with these innovative solutions. The first thing, of course, is to get it into the policy. That itself is challenging. It's not that easy to get it into it. Okay, and then ensuring that perhaps the structures are correct, and then some kind of monitoring would have to be done, right? But again, easier said than done. I think at some level, it all boils down to when I was talking about the tragedy of the commons, it all boils down to the citizens, right?
Institutions.
Citizens, how they actually respond, to these structures, because, I was writing a paper on wastewater reuse some time back, and then I came across one very interesting research that Hyderabad conducted. They're asking their citizens whether you would like to reuse or use the treated wastewater. Majority of them, yes. Okay, in the sense, in principle, yes, but practically we would not like to do that because we're not very confident of the quality that emerges out of it, right? So the point is, if the citizen support is not there, all these schemes are going to fail. I mean, honestly, there's no hope. Because unless citizens put their weight behind, these these schemes, that is the only way we'll be able to be successful. And I think that is why that could be that transdisciplinary approach, right? We're investing into those citizen engagement models. A very important part, sir, of the URMP the next 5 years is to help cities develop those stakeholder engagement models. So we're now investing a lot into that, because we are realizing that लोगों का साथ जब तक नहीं होगा ना, वो तब तक आगे हम बात नहीं बढ़ पाएंगे, so from that perspective as well, sir. Yeah.
Right. A quick question. I'll come back to you, Devarshi. Is about Mr. Upendra Rawal asking question about zero order streams.
Zero order streams, okay.
Yes, primary, secondary, tertiary streams are okay. You have dealt with them. How about those zero order streams that give birth to subsequent stream orders? Now, I'm assuming that it is from the point of view of zero order streams that are surrounded by urban settlements. But I don't know, it's up to you how you want to take it. And
So that's a
just
great point, and very honestly, we have not considered that.
Mhm.
So I think this is good food for thought,
Okay.
maybe looking forward. So we try to look at the, the
Streams that are
bigger
flowing,
picture.
whether it is
Exactly,
tertiary or
absolutely,
secondary or
absolutely.
which.
Zero order is something,
Right, right.
that's a wonderful point,
Right,
yeah.
right. Okay. Devarshi.
I had a small question. So yesterday I saw a very nice image where, so basically in a river, they're showing that some $1 million has been invested for a nature-based solution. And in the next phase, there is like some 2 times the benefit
Mm.
that it has got from the flood protection. So there's like just one image conveys a lot of messaging. So you mentioned about NBAs in the context of Ayodhya riverfront development. So, I mean, I had a little bit of hard understanding in terms of that in the context of NBAs. I mean, are we have those kind of financial or I mean, as a kind of a benefit that is actually coming out of, because I see a lot of these other programmatic plan, like climate change plan, where Mithi River was kind of a nature-based solution. So, I mean, do we have those kind of number, or we are sort of trying to imagine nature-based solution from a point of beautification? I mean, I'm a little bit, trying to sort of
No,
find
that's-
the correct.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a good point, and it's a very valid point as such. See, the thing with nature-based solutions, especially in the Indian context, this is my personal view. I don't think nature-based solutions work on their own. Okay, it's just that the development is so intense. You have BOD loading of 300, 400, 500 milligrams per liter. For nature-based solutions to handle that, I think is challenging. Even floods. Okay, so I think the best way for nature-based solutions to work in India is through hybrid solutions, and that is what we've been promoting through all our things, right? It's a hybrid thing. You will need mechanical things, but I think the greatest benefit that nature-based solutions afford, okay, and that is the narrative that we use with decision makers, is that these are your multifunctional infrastructure. While a stormwater drain is still best suited to provide you the flood benefits, okay, but it cannot provide you recreational benefits. It cannot provide you biodiversity benefits as such, right? Nature-based solutions have the potential to do that. So you have one solution which is providing you X number of benefits. And if you look at it from an engineering point of view, you need to have X solutions in order to provide those X way. So I think that is what actually attracts decision makers a lot, that, to invest in nature-based solutions as such, right? So from the perspective, like I said, sorry, what was your second question? I didn't know.
So you mentioned about Ayodhya riverfront development.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
They are trying to incorporate some nature-based solution to the already concrete.
Okay, yeah.
So I mean, the infusion is about a part of beautification, or it's actually eating some bit of.
Okay, yeah, that yielding part. All right, now I get it, right. So this is something that we were also looking at. So we have a project in Bhubaneswar which is funded by the Global EBA Fund. The whole idea is to quantify the ecosystem services of certain ecosystems. So we've zoned in on 3 ecosystems there. There's a water body, there's a marsh, and there's an urban forest, right? So my team there, Uday, I think you probably know him, right? So he's leading that project. So the whole idea there is, we're also trying to come up with a very similar thing. Okay, now here is a water body. And when you look at ecosystem services, there are these 4 categories, right? Provisioning, regulating, supporting, cultural, and quantify them, right? Okay, so this water body provides X kilograms of fish, or this water body is able to reduce your microclimates by 2 degrees Celsius, or is providing so many tons of carbon dioxide as sequestration benefits, right? So for each of these water bodies, we're quantifying them and then putting up boards in front of these ecosystems, right? So 2 things happen here. One is now people are going to think, or at least decision makers will think twice before encroaching on those ecosystems. And 2, very importantly, citizens become sensitized. That moment I was talking about, right? Citizens need to get engaged. And I think one of perhaps the entry point for that is for them to be aware of what these ecosystems provide. Right? So it's a very, I don't know, I'm very optimistic about that. I think in a couple of months we will have done that. And we would really like to do that across the city, pick up all these ecosystems across the city and have those boards, in front of each ecosystem quantifying, okay, this is the benefits, that ecosystem provides. And perhaps, you never know, that might be a paradigm shift in the way we are looking at, natural ecosystems in India.
Right. I think we're already past the time that we had for ourselves. This is almost 15 minutes past. So thank you very much. In
Thank you,
fact, as you can see, the kind of interesting questions, and then also the interest that your presentation has generated. And then as we did discuss, we hope to get you back to discuss the Delhi master plan.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps a revisit to the plan that you've made might help.
Yeah.
So we look forward to hosting
Absolutely.
your next talk in the same series, perhaps the first to have a repeated speaker, but on Delhi master plan.
Okay. Absolutely, sir. Yeah.
We would like to take you on that. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
joining
Thank
us
you so
today.
much, sir.
Thank you all for joining.
And thank you all for your wonderful insight. So it's meetings such as these, that actually that intellectual stimulation, jo bolte hain na, so and these actually help us to then process the next week ahead, right? So thank you, like for this invigorating discussion that we've had.
Thank you.